Greetings, everyone. We are back in a new episode for the American Horror Story What If? This time it's a special episode which is titled Sanctions of Destiny. It is about the witches and the history of witches and the connection between previous Supreme and past Supreme. On our last preview, we talked about how Fiona and her daughter, Cordelia Fox, or Good, was the only related Supremes ever in history. Alongside my two favorite YouTubers and subscribers, we were able to analyze some things that I never thought that was possible. As true American Horror Story fans, we sat there and analyzed some things that maybe some never managed to check. Like, for an example, one of my YouTuber subscribers said that he always thought that Fiona, throughout her years of supremacy and as well as her powers, the latent powers, how would it affair with the apocalypse season, which was season 8? So for me, I will go down in history and talk about the Miss Robichaux Academy. And believe it or not, when you walk into the Miss Robichaux Academy, you would see those two emblems of Trinity that has the ox, the symbol of the Robichaux, and the snake. And if you look at the original cover, it had three ladies sharing one snake slithering in different mouth, indicating treachery. Right? So back in the heyday of the Miss Robichaux Academy, we saw that there were so many different witches with different powers. But along all this history, when we started watching season 3, we saw that there were some unmissing questions that not only connected to the first season of American Horror Story, but some seasons such as Roanoke and such as the season of Apocalypse. For an example, there were major characters that shifted in our timeline, such as Anastasia, who had the ability to create shields and potions to shield her family, but sadly she couldn't protect all of them. That was back in season 8. Even back in previous understanding of the lineage of witches, they mentioned that in the first episode, which is titled Bitchcraft. They said that in every generation, sometimes it may skip a generation of latent powers. That's how we end up seeing Zoe at the academy in the first episode of season 3. Another thing that we started analyzing is that how come out of all the Supremes in history, Fiona is the only Supreme that managed to have a daughter, and thus we always had a feeling that as a kid it's like saying that as a kid that has a royal parent or a superstar parent, you will always live in the shadow of your parent until you have to do something separate on your own. Because Fiona even mentioned, you're the only daughter of the Supreme. You could have been ruling the world with an iron fist. Then we started seeing the cloud shift to Fiona Good, who mentioned that in order for her to become the Supreme, she had to kill her previous Supreme and thus gaining the power. So out of all the Supreme in history, Fiona is the youngest Supreme that ever got in her powers. And she got it at an early age. And she shipped it off Cordelia to a boarding school. And she gave custody that to Myrtle Snow. If anybody remembers, that's what happened. Then the Supreme that was reigning at that time which is named Anna Lee Layton, we never got full history of her. We even got that aside project, which was the American Horror Stories, mentioned that a character of Anna Lee Layton, which she made an appearance in the American Horror Stories timeline, but this time a younger version of herself. What was she known for? I know that there was a lot of latent abilities that she had, but Fiona said that due to the fact that she never took care of her health, she was declining even faster as a Supreme, and that's why she had to slit her throat. And she wanted to gain the power of the supremacy. But when Fiona mentioned Anna Lee Layton, she asked her, how did you become the Supreme? When did you feel like you was going to become the Supreme? And that's when it happened. Anna Lee Layton mentioned that the previous Supreme before her, which is Mimi de Lamprey. Now, stay focused on this name. We're going to hear it a bit later. Throughout Anna Lee Layton's life, she have met with two of her counterparts. One of them, which is the Voodoo Queen Mary Laveau, who literally signed a treaty because they were sharing the territory between her and the neighboring Voodoo witches. They signed a treaty indicating that no witch should be shedding blood against each other, with the state of racism at that time as well as bigotry. We saw that they both came to a conclusion. Each of them would not cross each other's path, but they will protect their own if something needs to happen. From then on, we saw there's some good she did in her supreme time as Supreme. She created a safe haven to protect more of her witches. She signed a treaty, and then later on the treaty was broken by, I think, Fiona, by disrespecting Mary Laveau and almost causing a whole down spiral of war. And they even said that the reason why the treaty was created in the first place was because Mary Laveau killed half of the academy and painted her wall and her brick stones red of her enemies. And her client mentioned that the great hero of that story was Marie Laveau, who literally signed that treaty so that way she wanted peace. But later on, this treaty was signed within betrayal. So going back to what I was saying, Mimi de Lamprey was a name that I had to search up. There's a connection between the Lampreys and the first family, which was Constant Linden family. The Lindens and the de Lampreys are close family relative, which indicates that Constant Linden and her lineage, either it was skipped, she was a witch, and therefore because it's in her bloodline, thus creating Michael Langdon. So if you think about it, because she had witchy powers, it was so easier for Michael Langdon to be born. Even though her family didn't have powers, they only had the ability to see ghosts and everything. Because nobody never sit there and asked, how comes Constant Langdon could see ghosts and spiritual things, and she knows when things are not on the ordinary? She just knows things. It's because in her lineage, she is a witch. So upon Mimi de Lamprey died at the Great Ascension, she gave rise to Anna Lee Layton, who became the Supreme before her. Thus, because she either used her power for not good or whatever it was, she declined her power so bad at a point where she was weakened enough for Fiona to kill her at that time. When Fiona finally gets the power, we never got to see the timeline of when Fiona was reigning as Supreme. We got more introduced to Fiona when she was leaving her powers, and thus as her term is about to expire, if she would have killed Cordelia or any Supreme, she would have regained all her strength. And she even mentioned that on the timeline. She said that if I kill a Supreme now, that will give me another 40 years to reign and to find out who the next one will be. And it's just going to be a cycle of killing until the next Supreme end up dying and the other one will die as well. In my opinion, and I remember two of my YouTubers mentioned, they said that, I believe, in my opinion, Fiona Good would have done a shitty job at controlling Michael Langdon. She would have even sided with Michael Langdon at first just to see what it's about, and she would have killed everybody else and tricked Michael Langdon for stupidity, because I feel as if out of all the Supremes, I think Fiona is the most cunning, and she has the ability to cast spells. And that's another thing I always wanted to mention. I know that every Supreme has the ability to do the 7 wonders, but there is an extra ability that each Supreme has. Like, for an example, Cordelia had the ability to foresee sight, and that is a power that was not given to her prior to being a Supreme. That was something she always had. Fiona had the ability of life absorption, which had the ability of almost like Vitalin Vitalis, but more extreme. She could literally suck the whole youth out of that person, and she could be young for like a few hours or stuff, but the moment she start using it, she gets old. Like, she started getting back to her regular self. So back to what I was saying. After she got her throat slit by Fiona, we saw present day that Fiona was literally the cause of Annalie Leighton, and thus already becoming the Supreme. Because remember, even if the Supreme dies and you still did the 7 wonders, sometimes it doesn't go to you right away, the energy of conservation or the ability of becoming Supreme. So when we even saw so many other characters trying to perform the same feat as Supreme. One of my other YouTubers mentioned that if Zoe didn't die, I believe she would have been the Supreme. She had so much potential but died because she let her guard down by playing the game. I believe that it's not the game that killed her, is that I believe when you training to go for the 7 wonders, all the 7 wonder powers are moving so quickly in everybody's bodies that the power could stop for a moment and it could explode your body to a point where you could be so excited to perform another one, not knowing that the other power is still in you. You might think that you're gonna do pyroclosis, and then you end up doing transmutation or mind control. A Supreme has to have the ability to balance all 7 wonder power when performing it. Remember, a Supreme has to be healthy, and a Supreme has to be able to understand the law of conservation, and that's how they pick their successor. They should not be scared of giving their powers away. Like, for an example, Cordelia, she gave all her powers to Mallory, and that's another question I want to talk about. Apocalypse did something that I think nobody didn't really mention. Apocalypse did something where we never know where Mallory came. We knew that she is the closest relative to the oldest council coven, which is the first Salem witch trial witches, which also will fit under the Scaffage, which is the first Supreme. Mallory's power is so closer to Scaffage or any other first or second. That's another thing too. We have so many Supremes that we never really talk about, and I think each Supreme, from the first to the 10th Supreme, we don't know what their abilities were. And I think the top 10 Supremes are probably powerful as hell. And I feel as if because they're so powerful, I think the bloodline started being diluted as the season of changing to Supreme carried on. So they mentioned that some Supremes sacrifice themselves for the safety of the coven. But I feel as if there were like two covens, and Mallory, either her coven got extinct, and that's how she became part of the Miss Robichaux Academy. And when they check her status, they said that her bloodline reached all the way up to the Salem witch trial. So she's closer to the higher ranks of the witches. That's why she was able to create some abilities that we never seen before. Like when she heals, she don't just heal. She reversed the whole power of things. She almost like has like an angelic godly power, which would be understandable for someone that's closer to the first Supreme. And we know that the first Supreme is probably the most powerful, because she has the ability, like the Roanoke, to cast an infinite technique that affects a majority of people all at once. So I wanted to give the shout outs to both of my favorite YouTuber subscribers. The shout out goes to the Ninja Project as well as Susan Roadkill. You guys did such an amazing job yet again, and I hope that you guys are interested in what I said. How come Fiona is the only person that connects to other Supremes, and when it comes to the previous Supremes, they never had kids. And I think that's something that we all should focus on. How come some Supremes never have kids, but Fiona is the only Supreme that have the ability to give birth, which she mentioned to Cordelia that she had to let the law of conservation leave her in order for Cordelia to actually live, which is a very touchy subject for Fiona, because she said that every time she saw Cordelia, she saw her own death. You know, I will carry on to the next episode, which is episode 4, which is titled The Voodoo Queen Lineage, and how come the Voodoo Queen is connected to the Supreme. We will talk about that on next episode. This is a special treat for you guys. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Share the channel. Our goal is 1K, and I'll see you guys soon.